Professor Riley characterized the university's president's speech as inflammatory and argued that it was therefore inappropriate. So Professor Riley is saying, like, hey, because it's inflammatory, then it is inappropriate. However, Riley has had a longstanding feud with the president, and so we should not conclude that her speech was inflammatory solely on the base of Riley's testimony. And so now we're coming in and saying, like, hey, we actually shouldn't even say that the speech is inflammatory just based on Riley's characteristic. Because Riley's saying, like, hey, it is inflammatory, therefore it is inappropriate. But then we're coming in and saying, hey, but Riley has a longstanding feud, so we should not actually conclude that it is inflammatory. And then our last sentence says, therefore, unless there are independent reasons to deem the president's speech inflammatory, it is not true that her speech was inappropriate. And so our conclusion here would be diagrammed like this, where unless introduces necessary, so unless there are independent reasons to deem this president's speech inflammatory, so independent reasons to be inflammatory, it is not true that her speech was inappropriate. So her speech was, so it is, so true, inflammatory. Okay, so what we do here is she assumes that, like, hey, because there's not good reason to assume that it's inflammatory, that means that it can't be inappropriate. But what her issue is, she's assuming that there can't be something else that's causing it to be inappropriate other than just the fact that it's inflammatory.
And that Riley is assuming that, right?
Well, Riley is saying that because it is inflammatory. Riley is saying because it is inflammatory, that's what makes it inappropriate.
Yeah.
But we say, hey, we don't get to assume that it's inappropriate, or we don't get to assume that it's inflammatory because Riley has this longstanding feud. And so since we have no reason to think that it's inflammatory, it's not inappropriate. But couldn't there be another reason it's inappropriate other than the fact that it's inflammatory?
Don't they say that though? Don't they say that, like, when they say unless there are other reasons?
They say unless there are other reasons to make it inflammatory. But there could be other things that make it inappropriate other than that. Like maybe he uses vulgar humor.
I see.
And so that's why it's A.
It takes for granted that speech could not be inappropriate if it was not inflammatory. I see. Yeah, like, okay, I see that.